So hello, everybody. I'm Tasha Chapman. I'm one of the members of the Executive Committee for SORA. So welcome to our May event for 2019. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. We've got a couple great presenters on deck, but before we do that, just wanted to do some welcome and some housekeeping and all that kind of fun stuff. Obviously, you found where the room is, so congratulations. Thank you for making it. There's bathrooms out there on either side of the elevators. Emergency exits all out there as well, all that kind of fun stuff. So before we start with our presenters today, I wanted to talk a little bit about SORA and some of the stuff that we've been doing and some of the stuff that we're thinking about doing for the upcoming year. So many of you, hopefully all of you, received our annual survey that we did at the end of the last year, I think it was, or maybe it was early this year. But we got a lot of really great feedback from that, and we're incorporating that in some great events this year, and I just wanted to kind of give you a heads up on what's coming up. So for those of you who don't know, the State of Oregon Research Academy is actually, there's about 12 of us that are the executive committee that help put this thing together. So all these events and everything that you see, the 12 of us help put that on. It's a great team to work with, by the way. I love these people so very much. And we have people roll on and off every year. So if you're ever interested in being part of the executive committee for next year, we usually do an open call in the fall. So keep an eye out for that and consider being on part of the team. So we SORA began in 2014. So this is actually our 5th year. September will be our 5-year anniversary. And in fact, I was doing a little bit of mental math this morning, and this is our 18th event, if I count correctly, like our actual presentation event. So we've been going pretty strong for a while, and I'm really excited about that. We do a member survey every year to get an idea of kind of what you want to see, what kind of topics and presentations you think are interesting, what kind of content you want to see for these events, and help incorporate that in planning for the year. This year we did something a little bit different. So we did that survey like we usually do, but considering this is our 5th year, we wanted to get some additional feedback. So we also did some focus groups. And we split those focus groups into 2 basic groups, folks who are kind of active members, those of you who come to our events all the time, have a good idea of who we are and what we do. And then also some folks who are either new to SORA or haven't had a chance to come to any of our events yet. And we really wanted to get a sense of, is there anything that we could do to bring you into the fold? Because we happen to like us, so how can we get you to like us too? So one of the questions that comes up on our survey that we ask you guys is, what are some of the most important benefits to SORA from your perspective? What is most important to you? What do you think are the important things that you want to get out of this? And there are 5 main areas that we ask about, and those percentages, for those who are wondering, are the percentage of folks who said that was important or very important. And so I kind of want to talk about some of these little areas and things that we're doing in them. So the most popular or the most important to most of you is learning opportunities, right? So an opportunity to learn about data and research and statistics, an opportunity to learn about software tools and computer techniques. That always comes up near the top of the list. And so along those same lines, that's kind of the core of what we see the group as well. And so we do these quarterly events, right? And we try to have 4 a year. So far, we've been successful, planning on continuing and being successful there. We also have the listserv, so that mailing list that you guys see where you get your notifications about upcoming events, things like that. You guys can also post to that as well. It's a moderated list. So basically what happens is you send an email to that email address. It comes to us that says, hey, so-and-so wants to send this message. And assuming it's not spam, we ship it out to you guys, right? So if you ever have a question like, hey, I'm doing a project that involves surveys, I would really love some some tips and feedback. Does anybody have some interesting ideas? If so, email me directly. I'd love to chat with you, right? So feel free to send those questions out to the group. That's why we're here, right? An opportunity to learn from each other. In addition to that, one thing that we haven't implemented yet, but we've been talking about, is adding some additional resources on our website. So OregonResearch.org is our website. That's where you can see information about upcoming events, where you can see recordings of past events, like this one. And one of our EC members is a state librarian who is interested in creating some additional resource pages and putting up some additional information that might be useful to the group. So you can access that directly through our website. One thing that we do ask about specifically on the survey is, what kind of barriers do you see to attending? Why are you unable to attend? And location comes up pretty often. right? Because we usually have our events in Salem. Most of us are Salem-based, but not everybody. So along those same lines, that's why we offer the live streaming. Hello, everybody. That's why we offer the recording. And also one of the things that we've been talking about is trying to organize an event in Portland, hopefully in 2019. So that's something we kind of have on our horizon that we're looking at doing. So keep your eyes peeled for that. One of the other things that you guys talk about being an important aspect of this group is networking. And when we did our focus groups, this also came up a lot as well in a lot of different areas, right? Because networking is an opportunity to look for collaboration opportunities, an opportunity to look for contacts if you've got job openings, to break through those silos between us all working at different agencies, things like that, right? So networking is a great way to do that. I know, I remember like during some of the surveys and focus groups, people were like, it'd be really great if I knew who was really good at Tableau, or who knew Excel, or who knew Visio. So if you guys could build us a database with names and, and I said, or we could just introduce you guys to each other and you can figure it out yourselves. So I'm a big fan of the latter. You might not know this, I'm a little bit of an introvert, but I'm a socialized introvert. So we've started a new event that we're gonna do monthly called Data Happy Hour. We had our last one in May. A bunch of you guys showed up, it was fantastic. So we're gonna keep it rolling. So please come join us. The next one is happening June 13th. It's 2 weeks from today. And it's just a really informal opportunity to get to know each other and hang out in an informal setting and build those networking connections. Another area that came up a lot in the focus groups as a way to build some more networking that we haven't embarked on yet but are considering is social media, right? So we haven't created social media pages yet, but it would be another great way to kind of help you guys connect with each other and get to know who each other are. So one of the other areas that we work on is career growth, right? So opportunities to enhance your current position and also opportunities to advance your career, right? I think that one of the best ways that we can help people with developing their career also helps develop our organization as a whole, right? We want our agencies to be as best as they can, and we do that by improving ourselves as best as we can. So in that same line, we have workforce development programs, which we are now reinvigorating and reintroducing. And so you can find on our website, OregonResearch.org, there is a tab up there for workforce development programs. And we are bringing back the Job Shadow program and the informational interview program. So this is still ramping up, right? So we're looking for people who are interested in being hosts for job shadows and informational interviews. So if you're interested in signing up as a host, then please do so. If you go to OregonResearch.org, there's a link to sign up as a host. And don't feel like you need to be like a senior analyst to sign up as a host. Even if you're an RE1, RE2, I think it would be great to bring people in to see what it is you do, learn a little bit more about your job, and get to know what it is you're working on. You can also go to that same site, of course, and sign up to participate in a job shadow or an informational interview. It's actually the same link. It's one survey that sends you to 2 places. So anyway, so if you're interested in either of those, check it out. So I just wanted to wrap things up by saying thank you so much to all of you for continuing to participate in these programs. You guys make it happen. Obviously, it wouldn't happen without you, and it's really great to see you. Does anybody have any questions or last feedback that you'd love to give us since you've got our undivided attention? Okay, so I'm going to introduce Samina now, who's one of our EC members, who's going to introduce our first presenter. So, Samina, take it away. Oh, this is just the clicker. I'll give it to Marganne in a second.
Do I need this?
No. Oh, you do need this. She's going to do it quietly with no microphone whatsoever.
We all have to do this, whoever is speaking. Thank you, Tasha. We're ready for our speakers, and our first speaker is Marganne Allen with the Department of Forestry. Marganne has managed a variety of teams in the Salem office of the Oregon Department of Forestry Private Forest Program since 2006. She currently manages the Forest Health and Forest Practices Monitoring Units. Prior to this, Marganne held positions in the United States and New Zealand in land use planning, sustainable business practices, and research and monitoring on a range of soil, water, forestry, and fishery topics. Marganne has a particular passion for exploring effective means of bridging policy decision-making and science. She's an Oregon State University graduate with an MS in Forest Management and minor in Soil Science and Masters of Forestry in Forest Hydrology. Marganne Allen.
So this,
Let's get, oh, you have it?
there, did I just turn it off again? So please tell me if I fade away or yell or whistle or whatever the case may be. So this is the first SORA event I've been to, and it's also now here I am on the hot seat from the beginning. So I appreciate your attention, and I admit I struggled somewhat with this presentation because my sense is that there's a lot of fellow data geeks in the room, but a lot of what we're going to be talking about is this tension between this desire to hide in our world of technical numbers, and then when we collide with the social things that are happening out in the big world. So that's hence the putting the fishbowl into my title there. I hope I can make it clear about why I brought in that image, why I'm going through in the presentation. And speak out anytime. I feel like I have to keep looking to the right or the left to stay with my speaker here. I'm not tied to my slides, so please ask questions and I can go out of order all over the place. Just abandon them as needed, so I want to go. So I'm both looking for technical input and then hearing your shared experience perhaps with where you have experienced similar kinds of tensions between running analyses of various rigor and the social tensions that come in with people who are very vested in what they want the outcomes of those analyses to say. So first, I just want to start off with just ask, so when you folks think of forestry, and please be candid, name some words that come to mind. You can say whatever comes to mind. Nature, okay. Fires, yeah. Logging, Hiking, okay. Anything else? You can, trees. Owls, yes, all that. Anybody think clear cuts? Yeah, you can say it. It's, right, it's all in there. Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's what the kind of world we deal with. And just very quickly, our department deals with all of that, okay? I am in the private forest division, and I do want to call out my colleagues. I have Paul Clements here, who really is one of our lead people in this effort. He's our training and compliance coordinator. And John Hawksworth back there is our main person who works in, the day-to-day running and building of the compliance audit. So, okay. So I think most of you already have the similar kind of expectations and perhaps of why you do monitoring, but I do want to ask that. How many of you folks do implementation monitoring? You know what I mean by that? Just checking to see whether practices happen? Does anybody here do that? Okay, do you mind if I ask for a show of hands just so I can get a sense? Okay, all right. What about specifically with compliance in an enforcement realm? A few of you? Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, it'd be nice to connect with some of you later. So we do have expectations in rules and statute, but we do have a particular emphasis on wanting to have these processes be collaborative, to inform continuous learning, and to continuously evolve. But here we are in the fishbowl because Oregonians love their forests. We're very intimately connected with forests. That's why we got into the business that we do. I stole these slides, just giving credit. This is from DHM Research, and Oregon Forest Resources Institute paid them to do a survey that we do for the Board of Forestry called the Values and Beliefs Surveys. And that's a word cloud of what people associate with forestry, and it's very similar to what you folks brought forward today. Generally, forestry as a profession, as well as wood products, is favored, looked upon favorably by folks within Oregon. We got beat out by agriculture. Anybody here from ag? Darn, we're number 2. But not everything elicits a lot of favor and trust in folks in the community. So deforestation, for example, in that form of clear cutting, or as foresters, we'd say, we go, deforestation, but we plant it again. So we kind of stretch, there's challenges with definitions and how people perceive things, definitely. So because of some of that background of perhaps some concerns with forestry, and please tell me if I'm not, I tend to wander a little bit, please tell me if I'm getting out of view of the camera, and just general interest, industry likes auditing because it helps inform what they need for third-party certification information. So it's both that sense of wanting to have a look at things and also wanting to be able to report for third-party certification. So in 2011, the legislator told us through a budget note, thou shalt do compliance auditing. And interestingly, and we think this is different from, at least as far as we know, from anywhere else in the country, we have to employ a contractor to do that. So not an official third party, like a third party certification. I think the correct term would be like second party, is how, because we're paying them to do it. So our goals there, of course, is to meet this goal for feeding a key performance measure that we bring to the legislature. But what the legislature asks for is tell us what is the big number, what is the statewide level for compliance across the state with the Forest Practices Act. The Forest Practices Act has been in place since 1971, with major revisions happening along the way, particularly in '94 and a number of times afterwards. We recently just did a major rule revision in the last few years. And so that's the basis of what we're checking compliance with, and that's a boiled up number of the statewide compliance. As I mentioned previously, the numbers also are consumed by industrial, well, not just industrial, but small forest landowners, what we call family forest landowners too, who work with certification systems like Tree Farm. Those are for small landowners. For us, though, honestly, our biggest interest is the education and outreach, because we work very hard with landowners and operators to get voluntary compliance with the Forest Practices Act. Not to say, we have enforcement ability. This is an enforceable set of laws, but we try very hard to keep the education level up high so we can get there through it just being second nature to people to operate in a way that they will comply. Okay, so our challenges going in when we had that budget note assigned to us is that we had a pretty tight deadline going on. In contrast with that, we have over 200 statutes and rules that we would need to be building something for. We didn't get there completely, and I'll talk about that. We had to do this from scratch. We had to come up with a new sample selection process, field protocols for every one of those rules and statutes in order to implement them. It wasn't just us who knew the rules and statutes who could go out and look or take some measurements. We had to be able to say, contractor, here's your directions. Now you get to follow directions on how you implement and collect information about implementation of the Forest Practices Act. Very challenging. And put all of that into a contract. We had to get site permissions. We do not have outright permission to go on landowner property. It's just like anybody else's, like your homes here. There's search and seizure kind of laws that we have to ask permission to go on. In our enforcement realm, I want to make sure it's very different. This is not the enforcement realm. We're the pointy-headed people, like I think many of you are in the room. We're not the ones with the badges. We have 54-ish people with the badges who are spread throughout the state, and they are our enforcement folks. But that's not us. We're trying to help inform them about compliance and the legislature and everybody else, and the Board of Forestry. So that is a challenge for us. And again, I emphasize this is not enforcement, And we needed to include stakeholders in the process. We wanted a broad range of stakeholders and other agencies who have vested interest. DEQ has been a regular member on our external review team, large and small landowners, and most recently, sorry, my throat's drying out a little bit, and I'll get to that a little later, Department of Revenue has joined into our external review team. So we began in 2013, actually with boots on the ground, and this is to give you a rough idea. What we do is we select sites to monitor from our notification database, formerly handwritten and hand-entered, now online, fortunately. That was a major change to our process, but this gives you a sense of how the sites are distributed across the state. You have approximately twice or 3 times the number of forest operations happening in Western Oregon than you would in Eastern Oregon. So really, we have these administrative areas, Northwest, Southern Oregon area, and Eastern Oregon area, and that's one of our stratifications. Overall, we are aiming for a sample size of 100 sites. We think that's about what we can afford, and they are roughly distributed like that. How are we doing? Please, go ahead. The question is why there weren't any dots in the southeast. Very good question. That is sagebrush and juniper. Yep. And this is selected. Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's a very good question. We again select from our database that tells us where landowners are notifying for forest operations. So any place that has notified for an operation is fair game to be selected. But there is little or no forest. And also keep in mind, let me give you a little bit of background. We're the private forest division, okay? That means we work on non-federal forest land. So you're also going to see that we aren't along the crest of the Cascades there, where most of your national forests are, things like that. So that's another dynamic I think you're seeing there, is that there's large blocks of federal forests in there as well. So that's another dynamic. So good question. Anything else? Okay. So as I said earlier, we have over 200 statutes and rules that are within the Forest Practices Act and its associated rules. In the time frame we succeeded in covering 57 of those rules in the first effort to get as close to meeting that deadline as possible set by the legislature. We picked first these different rule divisions, the harvesting rules in Division 630, what happens in the polygon where the logging occurs. Division 625, all the rules relating to roads, or most of the rules relating to roads, and most of the harvesting rules. Those are the ones that most people are interested in. There's plenty more, but those are ones of key interest. And then a smaller amount of what we call our streamside or water protection rules that look at the trees you have to leave alongside waters of the state. How we are going to have to do this is to build it in a modular fashion over time. Obviously, doing just this 57 isn't enough for us to claim victory and be done. We have to build the rest, and I'll be touching on the next part we're building. So the process that we elected to use, because it is difficult, making decisions about compliance is a difficult thing to hand off to a non-practitioner, right? Someone who's not familiar with your rules, statutes, the whole body of information that goes behind running an enforcement program. That's a difficult thing to do 100% contracting out. We had, both us and the other folks in our department had some heartburn or concerns about that. So what we elected to do was set up a process by which the contractor collects data. They do measurements, they make observations at different points or lines along the ground, and then we take that information, they give that information back to us, we analyze it for compliance. And what we do is set up effectively a preset algorithm for compliance. So it's not like we manually go through each time and go, Is that in or out? Is that in or out? Is that in or out? So that people can't, so we can be transparent. So when somebody says what data results in a non-compliance call in your protocol, we can say, look at algorithm number blah, blah, blah for rule blah, blah, blah. That's how, so we try to make it as transparent as possible so people can follow, oh, that's how you judge what is getting the thumbs up or the thumbs down. Yep, I think that's the key part. I'll look to Paul if you think I'm missing anything critical there. Bottom line. Oh, yes, thank you. And we do sample 10%. We do quality control and remeasure on that many sites behind the contractor. Thank you. Again, to come to compliance, what we have to know is that the rule actually applied at a given site, and it wasn't implemented properly, and damage resulted. Okay, so you have to have those three things in place. For example, you could have a really rutted forest road. You could have mud all over the road. But if it doesn't get to waters of the state, it's not non-compliant. It's not nice looking. It's not probably very good for them to maintain their roads that way and puts them at risk, but it's not non-compliant. Okay, so to give you a better sense of how we do that, we have different categories of data. We have water, which is the W, so effectively send our contractors, they have to walk every stream channel in a given harvest unit and look to see, did any sediment come in as I'm walking up the stream channel, or did they cut trees within 20 feet? We didn't measure all the remaining trees. That will have to be done, like I said, in a future addition to the audit, because what we call that a timber cruise, when you do a full measurement of all trees within the buffer, that we're just gonna have to build later. But for now, we wanted to know the most urgent part was, did you cut all the way down to the stream edge? So that's as far as we went with that. But they're looking both for making sure that trees were retained and entry of sediment into waters of the state. The R's are roads. They're collecting data at every one of the points there, and they're walking every single road within or immediately adjacent to the harvest units that we selected. And they're taking road measurements and condition observations, looking at the cut bank, what's happening below the road. They're looking at culverts. Are the culverts open? Is everybody, you all know what culverts mean? Okay, I never know when I'm talking lingo. Call me if I'm talking lingo. So they're looking for all facets of a well-functioning and well-maintained road. Okay. So everything was going great. We got a couple reports out, 2013, 2014, and then we got a records request. You know, those are normal. You get records requests all the time, right? Well, we did not build this audit in order for people to, we weren't interested in finding out compliance rates of individual landowners. That wasn't our purpose. We're trying to find out how you're doing in the state, how you're doing at the area level, how you're doing at different landowner types, how are the industrial landowners collectively doing, how are the family forest landowners doing collectively, how are state or county forests doing collectively. This request was targeting a particular landowner. So technically that record didn't exist because we don't create reports about individual landowners. So we had a choice that you can either have all the data set and then we give everybody's information away, or we have to make new records. That was a tough decision. So we ended up making new records in that case, and we provided that information. That was quite a dust up, I will say that. And basically what it came down to is at that point, the entire landowner community said, you need to find a way to be able to share the information, but don't make it about us as individual landowners, because that was not part of our deal, or we will not give you permission to come onto our land. That effectively would have meant the end of the compliance audit. So we had to take a pause and work with the Department of Justice to find out if there was some way to thread this needle. Basically, because this is voluntary, this is not part of our normal enforcement inspection process. This is monitoring. It's different from enforcement. For that reason, it is reasonable that they can say, if we set an expectation of confidentiality when we request permission, the Department of Justice felt that we had grounds to say, okay, under that case, because they're giving us data that is not required for regulatory purposes, that would be an acceptable way to do that. So in the future, if people say, we want your information, we'll say, fine, you can have every piece of information that you want, except the exact geography. We can fuzz it. You can have everything else, but you can't know about the landowner that it's associated with. Challenging decisions to make, hence the social tensions coming in. So 2015 was a loss, but we moved on and generated reports again in 2017 and 2016. Overall compliance is high, ranging from the mid to high 90s at this boiled up level. Again, this is showing, to give you a sense across landowner types and our administrative areas. Again, we do that as basic information, but that's not where the interesting stuff is, right? I don't think so. We don't think so, but it's a good place to start giving higher level numbers. Vegetation retention along streams is high. That's a good thing to say. People universally respect tree. Oh, please, go ahead.
On the numbers that you had on the previous slide,
Mm-hmm.
do you know how much of that has to do with the fact that your third criteria for determining compliance, which is that damage actually occurred, or do you know
Yeah.
what the percent would be if you were just looking at practice?
Okay, so the question, tell me if I got this right, was you were asking whether that compliance rate actually involved the restriction that it had to involve damage, as opposed to like what I brought to you, that does it involve you have an ugly road but it's not draining sediment. It's the former, that it had to result in damage. It was not just about you had an ugly looking road. It had to be you had an ugly looking road that didn't meet the rules and delivered sediment to waters of the state, for example.
Do you guys have an estimate of sort of the latter?
So the question was whether we had an estimate of the latter. We have not. We have had other people express interest in that. It's one of those things where it definitely wasn't one of the objectives. It's something we could do. Yeah, thank you. But there's definitely areas for improvement. We have consistently seen problems here, as you can, okay, hopefully this is going to be the right, oh, no, I knew I'd do that. There's the pointer. We need landowners and operators to do a better job of disconnecting the road prism, or not the prism, the road surface and the drainage features from waters of the state. That's a particular area where you can see that the road surface itself isn't bad, but just they could use a lift of rock in there probably, but they wouldn't be having a problem with it getting to a stream if they had put in some sort of a drainage feature there or there. That's an issue that has been repeated over time, and that's where our landowner and operator education program comes in. Another example is seeing road-generated materials on steep slopes. That one is an area of concern. Our small type ends, what we call non-fish-bearing streams, they do not require an overstory, large tree retention along them. For whatever reason, unfortunately, I think this is our hypothesis, people tend to forget they're there, especially in the middle of the summer. They're not flowing water, they're a dry channel. It doesn't take much vegetation even on the understory to cover it up. They tend to forget it's there, which is something that we definitely need people to be more aware of their crossings, removing crossings, and just avoiding these particular types of streams. In general, what we've been seeing for actual sediment delivery, and this is a visual estimate, okay? When the contractors are out there, is what they're trying to do is, we're not trying to estimate actual sediment yield from this kind of a study. We're trying to get a sense of, did you get a railroad car of soil going into waters of the state, or was it a little bit? You know, so this is to help gauge when we talk about this damage factor. There's damage and there's damage, and I'm not saying that a lot of small ones is okay, but it's still helpful to know, to have a calibration. Are we talking big damage or lots of little damage, or one big or many big? So that's what this is about. And that through those estimates, most of the sediment sources to waters of the state are smaller, and this is just 1 year. We do this for every report, okay? We generate this value. Some are larger, and the very larger ones in cubic yards are much less frequent. They do occur, but they're much less frequent. The most frequent are these smaller, either trace or up to a cubic yard. And most of them, again, are happening around these small type ends. That's happening less with the fish-bearing streams.
So there's 100 units?
Correct. Let's see. It would have been 36. Oh, sorry. Thank you. He was asking if it was half of them. I'm saying out of 100. I'm saying 36 units would have had that occurring. And also, I should mention, this is between from roads and skid trails. Do you folks know what I mean by a skid trail? Okay, thank you. Skid trail is where the actual ground-based logging equipment is occurring. Okay, yeah, please, if I'm going over the terminology, please let me know. So again, really for us, the values that come out of this is focused training is a key one, is that, you know, that's a lot of what my colleague Paul here is doing. We have not interagency, we have agreements with entities like Association of Oregon Loggers that we agree to a certain number of training sessions per year in order to elevate these issues, and we integrate this information directly into those training programs. And as I mentioned before, we have this, it also feeds this forest certification process and enhances the relationships that we have with forest landowners and operators. So when I talk about this modular kind of development, and I'm looking at the time, so here we are building again. So the previous effort that I just described to you was done over a 5-year contract. We are going to repeat that again, but for the time being, we have set that aside. The contract ended, and we were, done for now. But we're doing that in order to build a new module, and that new module is about reforestation. We have 3 questions as opposed to 57 that we did before with the 57 rules. Is basically, did they reforest on time? Did they put the right number of trees down? And did they use the correct species or an acceptable species when they planted or reforested? Again, we are going to be looking to sample this proportional to the area of these notifications I mentioned before, the estimated size of the harvest area, most likely about 100 sites. So that's a little bit difficult to estimate without, we'll see what the contract brings in, whether we can afford that. Looking at these clear-cut units, and again, engaging most likely a private contractor. Now, one thing I want to bring forward that I haven't quite emphasized enough, and well, let me see, I'll get to that, is then we have, again, questions coming up, okay? After that first effort was done, or very at the end or right after, I'm forgetting the timing on that, we had questions starting to come out about the compliance rates that we got. In particular was about the self-selection bias, the challenge that comes with that we have to ask permission to go onto lands to do this. That is a hard nut to crack. We've tried different ways through different outreach methods. We've tried friendly postcards. We've tried sending it through our local stewardship foresters first. I mean, think about surveys. I mean, how often do you guys answer every single survey that comes in to you? I know I don't. So it's very challenging when people are saying, well, people get to opt out. So how do you deal with that? Another is about concerns about independent samples. You saw all the sample points that we were talking about. How do you take all those points that we collect data on, and are points along a road best described as one sample within a unit, or miles per road? Samples per miles of road. These are all issues that we're facing right now. And sample size of confidence. How many do we have to get in order to be confident in our outcome? For example, it's this tension between at least how I perceive it, is operational monitoring in order to, for us, mainly feed an education and outreach program, and folks who have different expectations and desires for this. That if I go to a logger and say, you know what, I have a study and I've got 95% confidence interval. I did a stratified sample and I came out with blah, blah. Do you know what that's going to do to someone who is running logging equipment? Shut down. They don't care. And also there's that tension between statistics is subservient to the question you're trying to answer. I don't care if I get the most biased sample that's possible. I could go out trying to find a point. If it has to do with landslide and public safety, one biased sample point in my book is enough to say we have a problem. I'm not going to go tell the person whose home is below a non-compliant harvest unit with a landslide and public safety, don't worry about it. It's just one sample size. It's probably not really representative. We need our statistics to be representative of the effort that we're trying to support. So that's the tension that we're dealing with. Hence, oh, go ahead. And I'm over time, so I'm going to have to wrap it up, but please.
You talked about the sample selection. That seemed like a really interesting problem. What is the solution?
I don't have it yet, but that's good. Nice segue. I didn't plant him there. He was asking about how do we crack this nut. That's why we are reaching out for help. Okay, we are reaching out right now through an agreement with the Statistics for Natural Resources team at Oregon State University to help us address some of these questions. So stay tuned is what I would say. Yes?
Is there any potential for using something like aerial imagery or something that can probably detect water and things like that from the air?
So the question was about using aerial imagery. I have two levels of responses to that. I think some can and some can't. Just depends on what you're talking about. But the other part is that sense of goodwill. I can tell you for a fact that for an enforcement process, going from something like an airplane, something that is not common view, is not legal. If I had my former hat on where I was supporting the field support unit, there's some social, legal issues there that I don't have the final answer on that, but it makes me a little bit uncomfortable. Please, go ahead.
Aside from the aerial view, when you were talking about people walking paths, although that's great exercise, is there any future goals to have drones where you bring them in lower or even closer?
Okay. So the question, and I'm gonna look to Samina. How am I doing? Yeah, maybe do we have to call it quits there? Was about the use of drones. That is definitely something we're interested in, and I think it has the potential to speed up the work. And that's something even for our own stewardship foresters that we're just starting to dip our toes into the water for, is how do you use something like a drone, But here we are now, government with a little, not the big black helicopter, now it's the small black helicopter. Though landowners are using it more and more themselves. I think there's real potential to look into those kinds of tools to make this more efficient. But I think we're going to have to tread carefully because it's one of those things where I think that if one poor use of a drone could take it away from everybody as a tool, is my concern. So
we do have about 10 minutes right here.
Oh, okay, all right, okay. Go ahead.
I have a question regarding the penalties. I have a question regarding the penalties that the landowners, I'm curious, if they are not respecting the practices through the Oregon Forest Practices Act, are there any penalties? And if there are, what are they? How serious they are enforced?
Okay, so yes, there are. And I do want to emphasize again that we're talking monitoring as opposed to enforcement. But I'm still happy to answer your question, but that's a different pathway into the enforcement and civil penalties realm. We can charge a fine up to $5,000 for a violation, and it can be more depending on the circumstances. The rest, for me to be more specific, there's different formulas that assign the value of a civil penalties based on the cooperation level, the amount of damage, how much time it would take to recover, et cetera. So I hope that gives a general sense. Yeah. Okay, so just basically to wrap it up, that our next steps, again, is to complete this reforestation study. So we really want to get boots on the ground, but we're still in the design phase. We've had so much scrutiny. Boy, we cranked out that audit with 57 rules pretty fast, but now that the heat has come on and a lot of attention, this 3-rule look audit is, I'm getting a lot more gray hairs. I never thought that going out and counting baby trees would be so challenging. But we're looking forward to hearing the feedback from OSU StatNat group to help us through some of these challenges and ultimately getting this down to a finished field protocol and sampling protocol and getting our RFP out in ORPN and moving on. And ultimately, we're going to have to come back to that previous audit and do a similar look, revisiting our sample process and the like with outside help. And I would certainly welcome any help from any of you folks. So that was it. Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, please. Oh, sorry.
A quick follow-up question around the enforcement and recognizing what you were saying earlier about how this monitoring activity was voluntary. How have you had to navigate that where maybe you found something that was out of compliance in terms of that handoff to enforcement versus wanting the goodwill?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we do is we share the outcomes of what we see on audits with our field offices, both in a report level and we're working more, another next step I didn't get into is tailoring reports for different field offices to give them better information about that. So far, we have been reluctant to really link the two. But when I've been asked, no, you have to never enforce on anything that comes out of the compliance audit. Again, I'm going to refer back to that example I raised earlier with landslide and public safety. That's a rule division we haven't touched on yet, and we'll have to. We simply could not overlook if public safety is in harm. I'm not saying we like to overlook anything, but again, there's this tension. If we lay paper in the vernacular on every single thing we see, we are not going to get permission to go collect information anymore, is our concern. So it's a real tension between, do we get good information to educate people? So when our stewardship foresters always end up with more forest operations than they can possibly visit. They have to optimize where they go and where they look for concerns. That's an important part of what we do, so that we can direct them. You've got thousands of notifications. How do you prioritize them, and where do you look when you get there? Because believe me, to hike to the bottom of some of those units and come back out again, especially in eastern Oregon, some of those, one of our foresters basically works from completely almost north to south across the state, or darn near half the state. They can spend it in one day going to one harvest unit. So they have to really optimize their time. So we need this data. So the big stuff, we're going to have to do something about, for sure. After that, it's going to take some finesse. Yeah. Please. So the question is whether or not we checked with other states are heavily forested. Okay, to address similar questions. To some degree, we definitely are looking at different audit protocols that are happening around the state. There is something to learn from those, for sure. I know Paul, my colleague, has an interesting, it was Virginia or West Virginia. They have an entirely different setup. They actually do have outright permission, correct, to go.
Authority, not permission.
Yeah, thank you. Authority to go on forest land without, it doesn't matter whether you have permission or not, if it's in the performance of their duties. So different states have different policy paradigms that either make it easier or harder to do this. And many states, I think you should know this, West Coast states are different from much of the rest of the nation in that we have actual enforcement mechanisms in our program. Many states east of, in the east, I think it's fair to say, east of the crest of the Rockies, they're purely voluntary. There is no enforcement mechanism. So Western United States is a very different environment for forestry enforcement and auditing than other parts of the state. I do know our sample size is very high and very intensive relative to many other states throughout the nation. I also know that Washington is more intensive yet, and they also have a whole entire team that is dedicated to compliance auditing. Boy, would I like to have that. My team is split. We do it all. We do the effectiveness monitoring. We do the compliance monitoring. We do it all. So it's a challenging thing for us to have that many hats on. I hope that answered your question. Thanks. Please.
A lot of what you were showing was streams and roads, things like that. What about fire buildup?
Oh, okay. So
how do you address that? Is that part of the survey as they go out and take a look?
So the question was, we were focused on many water quality issues and roads and the like. He was asking about fire issues. That is a different division, and that is in our protection division, and they're under an entirely different statute, ORS 477, and they have their own enforcement branch. They don't have compliance monitoring in the format that we do at this time. They're using more the traditional mode, like our stewardship foresters. They have forest officers that go out and inspect forest operations, both active and previous operations, to see if fuel loadings are acceptable, if they have all the fire tools, if their operation, like if it's a cable harvesting with a tower down steep slopes, if you have cable rub that can cause fires by smoke resistance against trees and the like, that's what they're looking for. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Was there another one? Well, I really appreciate everybody's attention, and any feedback or questions later on, I'd welcome that. Thank you. Thank
Thank you very much, Marganne. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you for sharing wealth of information with us. It's 3 o'clock. We have a short break of 10 minutes. So please feel free to use restroom, have a stretch, or there are some snacks and water in the back. Help yourself. See you at 3:10. Okay, may I have your attention, please? It's time to resume our session and end the break. Can you hear me? Yeah? Yeah, I'm trying. Please take your seats. So we are ready for our next wonderful speaker we've been waiting for. Catherine Helms. She joined the state of Oregon in January 2019 as the state's first inaugural chief data officer. Before joining the state of Oregon, Catherine led an initiative to centralize information and data governance at the city of Austin, resulting in the formation of a multi-agency governing board to create policy and a core strategy for managing information throughout the city. Please welcome Catherine Helms.
Is that good? Can people hear me? Okay. And then there's a clicker. Oh, yay. Okay. So I'm Catherine Helms. I'm the new Chief Data Officer. I hugged a llama at a conference 2 weeks ago, and it's all I want to talk about. So here's a photo of me hugging a llama. But just sort of a quick introduction and some context for where I came from. So I did previously work for the city of Austin, leading their information governance initiatives. Some of that included open data, but most of it was kind of operational or internally data governance focused. Additionally, I actually have a degree in librarianship, so I did not come from an IT background, so to speak. I actually worked in archives and then moved to records and have now moved to data. So before I joined the city of Austin, I did graduate work for an organization called the Human Rights Documentation Initiative. And our primary force, I guess I should say, our driving force was sort of information management consulting for countries or nonprofits or governmental organizations who were in the process of managing records after a human rights crisis or a human rights issue. So post-genocide, we need to steward these records and make sure that we preserve their evidentiary value in the event that we have a tribunal or a human rights case or that the International Criminal Court is involved. So my job was called post-custodial archiving. So rather than that traditional method of, these are really cool, we'll pay you $5,000 and we'll go ahead and take them with us, or we'll pay you $5 million in some instances. Instead, it's about managing the records in place and trusting that the custodian of the records are the ones who should retain ownership and custodianship of them. So quick overview, and I'll say I don't have a ton of slides. This is mostly just an introduction to me and my office, and then I wanted to give you a lot of time to ask questions. So feel free to interrupt me, but you probably won't see a lot of like super exciting substance on the slides. It's just an overview of my position. There's also a one-pager introducing you to my office in the back that just has my contact information since I don't have business cards yet, and a quick overview of the House bill that created my position. So there was a House bill passed in 2017 that took effect in 2018. It took a little while to hire me, but the House bill created the position of the Chief Data Officer. It also established the idea that we as a state need to manage information and data as a strategic asset. So really underscoring the fact that information and data have value, and they have important value as assets of the state and as property of the constituents of Oregon and taxpayers, that we need to steward them correctly. What else? So it identified my primary requirements, I should say, in the areas of data governance and data sharing. Data sharing was a big piece of the legislative work that created my position. And then it also has deadlines that are associated with open data that are being revised because they have already passed. So just a quick introduction to kind of the mission of the Chief Data Office. I view it as three primary buckets, right? So constituent service and digital service delivery kind of as a single thing, right? Are we able to improve services that constituents in the state of Oregon receive through better data management and better data governance? Thinking about especially things like our web presence as being the front door for the state of Oregon. Are there more interactions or better interactions that individuals within Oregon can be having online rather than having to, I don't know, engage with 12 different paper forms or having to fax paperwork in or engage in some other long bureaucratic process? Are there in fact things that could be simplified through better online service delivery? Additionally, operational efficiency. So are we doing things in the most efficient manner? Are we stewarding our information in a way that allows us to collect it once and use it multiple times? Are we being responsible with these assets that we've been tasked with managing? And then lastly, mission effectiveness. I jokingly call this the is our children learning, right? Is our program working? So are we actually seeing not just we served 300 people, but those 300 people actually had better outcomes because of engaging with our program? My vision for the future. So just, again, thinking about what information, or I should say what mature data governance looks like in an organization. The primary thing I think about is data being governed effectively to increase transparency, to improve collaboration, and to pave the way for digital services, as I mentioned, so improving constituent service. Additionally, data literacy becoming culturally ingrained in the state of Oregon. I think it's Gresham has dictated their value for data governance as enabling a culture of curiosity. And I really think that that is a fantastic way to put it, that people now have access to more information and more tools and are empowered to ask more questions. So it doesn't become, I am the person with this super secret knowledge, or I'm the person who has that spreadsheet on my desktop. It's now we all communally can discuss our information assets together. And we're empowered to be more curious. And then that ties into the last piece of data sharing becoming a core cultural value at the state of Oregon. I have 2 divisions that have staff and then 1 piece that has been included in the purview of my work. So I do manage the Oregon Transparency Program, which has 1 staff person who oversees the Oregon Transparency website, which was established through a statute in 2009 and then revised in 2015. So we do have an Oregon Transparency website that publishes data related to expenditures, budgets, and we're also in the midst of a redesign of that website. So if you use that page and you have feedback, please let us know. Additionally, I have the statewide geospatial enterprise office. So if any of you work in GIS or work with Cy Smith and his staff, see some hands raising, they are actually part of the Chief Data Office with the idea that GIS really needs to be incorporated into this larger data strategy for the state. And additionally, I've inherited Oregon's state data portal. I don't know if anyone actually publishes data to data.oregon.gov. Okay, got like a maybe, yeah. So we use a tool called Socrata. We purchased it around 2009 and then went, it will manage itself. So that's why it's mostly been voluntarily adopted. And again, why my position was codified to really improve the management and use of this data portal and also to get more folks contributing data assets to it. So what have I been tasked with creating and what are agencies supposed to do with it? So I am responsible for creating an enterprise data strategy. Additionally, I'm responsible for a data inventory, or I should say agencies are responsible for inventorying their information and providing that to me so that I can publish it in an enterprise inventory. There's also an open data standard that will be created, as well as a technical standards manual for complying with this open data and enterprise data strategy. And then additionally, I am supposed to champion data sharing throughout the state. So acting, I view it mostly as a matchmaker, right? Finding agencies that might have data assets that make a lot of sense to share, I've actually already been brought into discussions with agencies who know that they want to share or know that there are agencies that they want to work with, and it becomes what is the appropriate method through which we do this. Agencies also have some requirements to comply with the data standard and to participate in data sharing as appropriate. So what does this actually mean for you in your agency? There are forthcoming guidelines. The bill does have deadlines that are being rewritten to take effect in about 2021, so you've got some time. But there will be guidelines for inventorying your data assets, providing that information to the Chief Data Office. Additionally, there will be some feedback on developing your own internal data governance strategy, as well as developing an open data plan. I want this initial implementation especially to be focused on self-assessment and looking at maturity throughout your own organization. So some of you already publish data really proactively through whatever means you might have. You might have your own website, you might have real-time data that's accessible through an API. My goal is not to undercut any of that work, but is instead to give you a platform to say, this is where we are, and over the next year, we're going to mature through this avenue. So instead of really prescriptive methodology, most of it's going to be, here's a maturity model. Is it available online? Great, here's 1 star. Is it available online and machine readable? Great, 2 stars. So looking again at kind of maturing your program wherever it is. Where are we now? I'm in the process of identifying use cases and agencies to partner with. So if you feel like your agency is in a place with maturity, or if you already have a data management champion within your organization that you think needs to be connected to me, please let me know. Additionally, I am looking at current data strategies through my colleagues in other states. So there are about 20 states with chief data officers. The most recent person who joined us was Alaska, so yay Alaska. We're also identifying some of my core consumers of open data. So coming from the city of Austin, I was used to pretty regular citizen feedback through our open data portal. At the state, there seems to be a little bit of a layer of abstraction there. There's not necessarily as much direct, immediate constituent feedback. I suspect that's where you as business data owners are probably encountering a lot more direct feedback or needs identified through the constituents that you work with, or citizens who are particularly engaged with the work that you're doing. Additionally, I'm in the process of drafting a lot of the core mission, vision, and values of my office. This is a brand new position to the state, so we're in the process of figuring out, what our next steps are. I'm also a staff of me and then a few divisions, but they all have other jobs, so they're not in the process of following this with me. And then lastly, how can you help? So overall, do you use the data portal or the Oregon Transparency website, or have you explicitly chosen not to use the data portal? Either of those things, I am really interested in hearing any sort of feedback from people who are in the day-to-day realm of dealing with data or grappling with data or experiencing data management issues throughout their own organizations. Additionally, are there people in your agency that you think I should be connected with who are engaging in this work? Please do let me know. And then are there any unmet needs that you might have related to data governance or data sharing? Or is your agency already doing this and you're perfect and you just want to let me know? All of those are perfectly valid reasons to contact me. And I think additionally, I can provide some support. So if you are initiating a data governance strategy, I know quite a few agencies have recognized that data governance and data management are an ongoing issue and they need to be really strategic about how they tackle this. So if you need support in that arena, or if you've already started that effort and want my help, additionally, I am there to help you liberate data or create an open data plan, and then identifying any avenues for collaboration and data sharing. And we're still figuring it out. So my big focus is really on collaboration. I can't be successful if agencies don't want to work with me. So it's really important to me that we kind of keep that line of communication open. I want to make sure that I'm available for any sort of communication or discussion or feedback that you have. And that's it. So if there are any questions specifically about my role or more questions about this very new program and this very new person, feel free. Do we have someone with a mic? No. Oh, okay.
So a lot of the agencies have data that is highly sensitive, but also highly valuable, right? And so there's that tension between transparency and confidentiality. Where do you see your agency in the role of helping other agencies negotiate that?
So that's a very good question. There are some lines in the legislation for my position that do have me providing privacy guidance to agencies. I am not a lawyer, and I am also not an expert in the specific regulatory backing of every single agency. Instead, I view it more as a process of negotiation. I've jokingly said sometimes agencies feel like if they just shout a regulation at me, I'm going to turn to dust. Like I'm going to go away if they go, we have HIPAA. So that's not my intent. Generally, it's going to be, okay, is all of it private? Is all of it confidential? Or are these 11 elements PII? Or if you can't publish row-level data because it's easily identifiable, could we publish aggregate statistics? So it's less about it has to be made available in this raw format, and instead is what is the appropriate choice based upon kind of the regulatory and statute limitations that you have. So yes, I'm available. I'm not a lawyer, but I am there to help steward through the process.
I actually wanted to ask you about, and I think it's a good segue, the open data plan. Could you elaborate on that a little bit in terms of the intended audience of open data?
Yeah, sure. So the open data component, open data and data governance are tandem processes, but they are not the same, and I want to be really clear about that, right? So data governance is really the management of information and data assets internally within an organization, and then open data is this additional piece that is the publication of data to some sort of portal for access. I think our primary consumers at the state level are actually going to be local county governments, so agencies or people that you already have a relationship with. We have a few citizens who use the data portal, but we don't have a lot of direct Oregonians that are accessing data.oregon.gov. If you know of any organizations or civic tech organizations who do use the portal or want to see certain things, please let me know. I'm still trying to find those constituent bases. But I think the intended audience, I would say, of the open data plan is to really prioritize internally what are the data assets that we have that are of most interest to constituents. The other option is proactive publication if you get a lot of public records requests for specific types of information. So rather than continually respond to the same public records request over and over, could we instead make this a data set on the portal and have that be more accessible?
Hi, I'm Gene. Nice to meet you. I work for CFO. What's the disposition of the CDO to the state data marts? Do you manage those? Are they under your jurisdiction? Have you heard of them?
Are you talking about like the
PPDB
SFMA?
and all of there are these like state data marts where I put in a request to be able to access that data, and it's supposed to all be there. Sorry, that was kind of leading.
Are you implying that it's not?
Anyway, it's interesting, you know, like what's in there and how up to date it all is and everything. But I was just curious, since you're the CDO, is that coming under your jurisdiction as well to manage that, or yeah?
So it hasn't been escalated to being the role of the CDO, especially if it's already managed. I'm assuming you're talking, though, specifically about things that are probably managed by DAS, like Department of Administrative Services, or other agencies. So I am not owner of any business's data, but at the same time, I do want to hear about situations like this, right, that we're supposed to be sharing data really effectively, but for whatever reason, that data is of poor quality, or I'm not able to get my work done because there's limitations to whatever system I'm using. My role is more than to be kind of like a steward or a facilitator to say, okay, great, if a lot of people are not having their needs met by a specific data mart, are there changes that could be made? Or does it just need to be that there's a governance structure in place so we don't do any data quality assessment because there isn't any owner or custodian of that system who is stewarding it in that fashion? So,
Thank you. And thank you for Bill Bezic. He and I have been working together
Okay.
on the enterprise BI.
I do have an employee that I loan out for Power BI work.
Hi, my name is Evan Fuller. Are there any plans in place to kind of leverage on some of the existing between agency work, like integrated client services in DHS and the state longitudinal data system out of the Chief Education Office? And if so, like what can you say about how those plans are going forward to build on those collaborations that already exist and strengthen them and bring new members in?
Right. So much of my work at this point has been connecting to those agencies. So I do have a relationship with the state longitudinal data system. I sit as kind of a non-voting member on their governance committee. Additionally, I have met with the folks at ICS to talk about some of their strategic needs. So at this point, it is plugging into whatever the strategic goals for those initiatives might be, and then part of this feeds into the fact that over the coming year, we'll be working on an enterprise data strategy. So what is already happening, and what are the strategic visions that are going to feed up into this larger vision for the state of Oregon? So right now, I'm trying to be connected to those things. I'm also connected to the PRISM people in employment. So just making sure that I have an awareness of all of these data sharing efforts, but at this point, it's mostly support while we try to talk about what the larger strategy might be.
Can you say a little bit more about what would be involved in the open data standard?
Sure. Yeah. So I suspect I'm actually going to borrow pretty heavily from San Francisco's model. So if you want a preview, you can look at what Data SF does. There is a mandate in the actual legislation for my position about inventorying data, identifying whether or not it can be made public. Those definitions are relatively ambiguous because obviously legislation is not going to cover everything. So I'm in the midst of identifying kind of the bumpers that I want to place around the idea of publishable, because things like confidentiality concerns are real, but I also don't want people to say, well, there's one element here, and so now it's all secret. I suspect what it will look like, especially in this first year, is identifying your data assets, so inventorying and then prioritizing them according to value. So these would be fantastic to make public. They're a huge part of our transparency. They are mission critical to us in a way that we have people asking about them all the time, or they're a great representation of the work that we do. And then prioritizing how you're going to make those assets public. But in terms of like architectural standards, I think most of it will be kind of managed in place. So if you have ETL tools or extract, transform, load tools, you're perfectly able to use those processes to automate data publication. You can also use the APIs available in the data portal. So from the technical piece, I think it's going to be right sizing based upon kind of the infrastructure you have in place within the agency. And then the data standard itself will be much more focused on inventory, identify, prioritize, publish.
Hey, so I'm wondering, you know, when you're talking about releasing information or inventorying information, what's available, what can be released, what needs to be sort of kept sacred. I'm wondering, are you anticipating that there's going to be sort of only limited exceptions to where you could say that, yes, this information is protected for some reason, and no, we can't release it? And I ask that because sort of looking back from other occupations, there does seem to be sort of often a culture of really thinking like, hey, this is my data. You know, when you ask for it, regardless whether or not it's public information, it's always like, what do you want to use it for? You know, and it's sort of that, you know, you're trying to make a determination or a value judgment that, in my opinion, isn't ours to make. And I'm leading the question here, but what do you anticipate, or how do you anticipate, I guess, affecting that culture first, which I think is going to be really challenging. And then the more basic question is, again, do you anticipate very narrow sort of limitations to people saying, hey, this is mine, really?
Yeah. So with over 500 exemptions in the public records law, I don't know how narrow I can actually be when it comes to identifying data that can't be released. I mean, I think culturally, and this is not specific to the state of Oregon, this is something that we ran into in the city of Austin. This is something that you run into in a lot of organizations, right? Information becomes kind of your endemic value as an employee. So it becomes, don't ask too many questions about the work that I'm doing because this is my data and it's precious, and my knowledge being secret and sacrosanct means that I have direct value to my organization. And that's not about anyone's particular shortcomings. That's just a fact of life, right? Like, we all want to be valued. And one of the ways that we do so is by having super secret knowledge. So I think it just comes down to showing that sharing actually is a much more effective way of getting your work done. So I've had some really good meetings with agencies where they go, oh my gosh, if we had access to this data, we could actually find out far more about the care organizations that are working in the counties. Or if we could get these people to communicate with each other, we could actually ask this huge range of questions that have not come up before. I think the statewide longitudinal data system is actually a really good example of seeing that embodiment of, oh my gosh, if we actually have major codes related to occupational codes, we can find out real outcomes related to my major in college and what it means for my wage information in the future. So having that ability to kind of connect the dots seems to tear down a lot of those silos. I think there will always be people who are more risk averse or more protective of their information, and it just comes down to kind of slowly building that coalition of the willing, and bringing in that culture where people can feel valued or important through other means, and as a result don't feel the need to say, well, this is mine.
So building on that and thinking through the direction that you see for, you know, kind of the culture of the Oregon enterprise, especially around data literacy, you know, kind of trying to build up staff's data literacy so that as they're getting access to data, we're making responsible deductions from it and interpreting it in a way that's responsible. What do you see as, you know, the role of your office in partnering with agencies in doing that work? What do you think that might look like?
In developing data literacy?
Yeah, and building that capacity.
So I think there almost needs to be like a completely separate like training and development section of the CDO for things like data literacy. Something that has come up recently, I was able to attend like a regional open data meetup that was Portland, a few cities surrounding the area, Metro, Multnomah County, and it looks like we're actually expanding to include Washington and Clackamas County. But there's been discussion from Portland about creating an actual data analyst apprenticeship program with the idea that if we could, between the state and the regional governments, all agree on things like standards for what a data analyst is expected to know, or standards for what they might receive in terms of training, it would really make kind of portability between different agencies happen, but at the same time, we would also all be on the same page when it comes down to what does data literate actually mean? Because you have expectations as a research analyst, right? You might need statistical knowledge, or you might need the ability to come up with like a defensible hypothesis, test against it, and then provide those results. And then there's also data literacy from the perspective of, I have Power BI or Tableau, and then I have a data source. Do I understand enough about the data that I'm working with to just baseline, ask how much money did we spend on X, and know whether or not I've actually answered that question? I think the CDO should have a role in that data literacy piece. What that training program looks like right now is still up in the air, but I think just building that culture of people talking about data and being outcome focused is kind of step one. So just recognizing that we need to be much more focused on how our programs are actually delivering, and that we're probably collecting data or information to support testing that hypothesis.
I can probably talk loud enough anyway. Is it recording me? Oh. I don't know, maybe not. So have you gotten involved in the whole thing of trying to have some consistency in race, ethnicity, and disability data?
Oh, like the Real D standards?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
And that's just an honest.
Far away.
No, and that's just an honest. I haven't been brought in to have that discussion. So.
Okay. Do you have an intent to get involved in that, or are you just going to kind of let it go its way? Or
I have not been informed that there was a problem, so that's really where I am, is that the way that I learn these things is by people telling me about them. So I just haven't had anything
I'm not
mentioned to
saying
me
it's
about it.
Problem, it's just a challenge.
It's an opportunity.
It's an opportunity.
It's an opportunity.
Yes.
Okay.
I wanted you to be aware of that opportunity.
Thank you.
I'd like to present you with another opportunity.
Great.
I just took a job as a research analyst 4, having been an ed specialist at the Department of Education. I was shocked to learn that the qualifications for a research analyst 4 is a bachelor's degree or 3 years of experience in replacement for that bachelor's degree. The challenge that presents is it doesn't offer any opportunity to reward somebody for a good deal more education and experience. Is there any possibility you could push to move for RA 5s and 6s to get a little bit more recognition? Because we lose people when they become really good because there's no room to move. I could be an ISS 8,
Right.
but I can't be an RA 8 because there's just no such thing.
So research analyst caps at 4?
4,
Okay.
yes. And
Today
by the
only.
way, this is me just whining a little bit. I took a $20,000 a year cut to leave being an education specialist 2 to be a research analyst 4. So there's room here that needs to be recognized, I think.
Okay. Okay, so I'm hearing. Yeah, I was going to say, so I'm hearing pay equity to some extent when it comes to actually recognizing the work that research analysts do.
Tack on to that. Basically, a research analyst does the IT stuff that the IT people are doing and does the statistical and analytical. So they're doing more than the IT people are doing, and yet they get paid less. So,
Okay. Are we going to meet the IT people in the parking lot later? Is that what this is about?
Yeah, can I have an escort?
Okay.
Well, to add insult to injury, there was the study they did a couple years ago that compared the state of Oregon to like other jurisdictions for all the different pay classifications and job classifications. And across the board, we're at close to 100%, some 97%, some 103. The RA3 was one they looked at. It was 80% of what it would be pay in, say, Multnomah County or private sector or anything of that nature.
Okay.
Which wasn't my original question. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay.
So, yeah, we've got a lot of heartburn around this.
Well, I think, I mean, recruitment as a whole, right, is a hot button issue for the state because we're all panicking that at any given time, a third of our workforce could leave. So the reason that I left Oregon in the first place is because there was no library science program. So even connecting to other information professionals in the state is really important to me, and whether that's through people who do analytical work or whether that's people like me who instead just like to talk to the people doing the analytical work and talk to them about kind of what that strategy is. That is personally something that is really important to me, is looking at the opportunities to kind of grow that workforce.
So what I did want to say was, well, first of all, if you ever actually do create a training and development section, please let us know.
Okay.
And I guess I wanted to make an earlier comment about the comment about why people keep the data so close. And I think you bring up some valid points, but I think I see some other things from my perspective as well. One being, like I said, a lot of the data that we keep is very confidential, in the sense that, for example, our agency, so I work for this agency, DCBS, and one of the pieces of data that we collect is workers' compensation claims. So when people get injured on the job, that claim information actually comes to us. Well, it comes to the insurers, and then the insurers send it to us. But we have information on individuals in the state of Oregon who have been injured, how they got hurt, all that kind of stuff. Again, very valuable information for safety and health, prevention efforts. But also that data doesn't actually really belong to us. It belongs to the workers who got hurt because it's their information. So that's part of why we keep it really confidential. And also, in this day and age now with, increases in AI and machine learning and, data gathering methodology, it's a lot easier for data that appears to be de-identified when you send it out to not be de-identified very soon after it goes out into the world. And so we, are very cognizant of how do we walk that line of releasing data without compromising that data.
Right.
The other thing that I see though is, again, as was mentioned earlier, is that idea of responsible data analytics and understanding of what that data is. I know that a lot of agencies get a little nervous about their data getting out there in a way that they don't have the ability to provide the interpretation of what that data means. And then they turn around and suddenly there's legislative testimony that's using their own data against them in a way that actually isn't even appropriate at all, oftentimes. And so those are other concerns that we definitely deal with that you'll run up against as well.
Yeah.
So.
Was it Mark Twain that said there are lies, damn lies, and statistics?
Right, so there is some kind of baseline acknowledgement of things like the mosaic effect in the House bill. When it comes to actually, like, I certainly don't want to mistake being overly protective of information, which tends to come down to like individual level personalities. And then we actually have to be, like, good stewardship to us is embodied in protecting this information appropriately. And I certainly don't want to conflate the two. And I think something that happens a lot is the narrative that agencies are not sharing. And I haven't actually found that to be the case. So most of the time it's either we want to share and don't necessarily know the appropriate means to do so, or we might be sharing. It just turns out that the question that we were asked, we don't have data that's responsive to it. And I think you'll hear that come up a few times, like even in session, right? Where, well, why don't we have an answer to this question? And it might be that we just never collected the data in that way before, or the data we have doesn't actually respond to this question. And what is heard is, no, I don't want to. And so some of that comes down to being really transparent about what we do have and what we can share. And I think things like enterprise data catalog or an awareness of custodianship will help kind of allay those concerns, because at the same time you can be transparent that, yeah, we do collect workers' comp data. No, we cannot share it. That is an ethical consideration that we have had to make, or we have actual statute that says we cannot share it. The same is true for things like 1075 data, right? Like federal tax information. We're very limited in the information that we can share within that area. And so just being honest that these are the limitations that we operate under. But sometimes then there's also that, like, well, I have a baseball bat of this really general regulation and I'm just gonna periodically throw it out. And so kind of separating those two concerns from each other is important.
So I have this elementary question.
Oh, yeah.
I was in the process of organizing this event with my colleagues, and I talked to a number of people I work for the Office of Health IT at OHA, and explained that you were coming and who you were. It was a new position, and I was disappointed that no one really knew about that new position. And I'm wondering if you have developed a communication protocol or planning to do so to let them know, all the agencies in the state, what your role is. And also how they can communicate with you, and also how can have a communication protocol to, talk to a different that communication between the agencies and how they can share data.
So one piece is communication about the existence of my office, and then the other is communication within agencies in general?
Correct.
Okay. So in terms of communication about my office, I know there was kind of a general announcement from the CIO's office. I know the CIO Council received it. I've also presented at the executive leadership team and a few other places. So let me know if there are people that don't know I exist. I've tried to be very transparent about it, but at the same time, since it is just me, part of it is like taking the time to come to events like this and be really clear that I do exist. And then in terms of better internal communication between agencies, I think there's a lot of opportunity actually with things like Office 365 that come up with the ability to collaborate and share information a little bit more effectively. I think we all come up with workarounds just when it comes to like baseline sharing information, right? Like we use Box or Dropbox, or we upload things to Google Drive because the whole point is that we want to be able to share and collaborate with each other. Feeding that into sort of a more enterprise strategy with how we view even baseline things like not having visibility into other agencies' calendars makes me really frustrated, right? And I don't think that's like that's not one person. That's just the fact that we happened to come from that culture of like, well, I got funding to improve my own internal management system, and so I took that money and I implemented this, or I've decided that managing email in my own server farm makes more sense for me. And so I think plugging into that larger enterprise strategy, this is a very new mindset for the state of Oregon as a whole of, oh, we could probably all pool our resources and instead kind of uplift everyone together. And I think a lot of those silos get broken down the minute that you have better avenues to collaborate. I think part of this is, like, technologically, we have built these silos either through accident or intentionally. And then once those silos kind of get broken, it's going to become it should become a lot more easy to share that information with each other. So, yeah. Calendar availability, it's a big thing.
I think the fear about things being twisted is quite big, and I've seen this as far as, I think it's all not just that I've definitely seen the individuals hoarding the information, but I think there's also kind of a fear, the culture, like as far as like everything we share is an additional risk of some kind of headache that can get twisted, someone will get confused, and then at the very least, that's a bunch more time that I don't have to go straighten that out.
Right.
And I came from the academy, and I was very interested in people get an email from a question. I'm like, oh, I get to explain things. I love explaining things. And for management, it was like, you answer their exact question. You just answer just the question they gave you. Anticipate, obviously, they would be interested in learning other things. You don't do that. But then that can also lead to confusion, because I had someone ask me about this data about Oregon Motor Voter, the people who said it was undeliverable, this little mailer that they get, what that mean. And I explained like that it meant that the mailing had bounced. And now if you Google me, you find me on some friend's blog about all these people who were registered to vote even though the thing bounced, which is not at all what I said. And if they'd read the report, it would have explained that. They just asked what those bounces meant, and I explained what they meant, and then they fed into that, and then they like quote me on the blog because we were in that kind of adversarial, I'm just answering your little question, as opposed to I'll help you and build this trust and explain this, how it actually works. And maybe then that kind of relationship would have given them the actual information they get. But how do you change the culture of a bunch of other agencies?
Be charming. No, I mean, cultural change takes a lot of time, and some of it comes down to even just articulating that these are challenges that we're facing. I think this adversarial relationship that's created between people requesting information and people who have information has come up a lot in the agencies that I communicate with, right? It's not about, again, that I just want to be a jerk. It's actually, I'm really concerned because this could be a request by someone who might have like a fundamental belief that I should not be collecting this information in the first place. So now I'm already in this spot of, I have a person who isn't operating in good faith from my end, but I'm expected to operate in good faith on. Some of that is actually, I would say, you guys probably need to establish a relationship with the public records advocate. So she's really fantastic. Her name is Ginger McCall. So she was she was brought in to help mediate a lot of these disputes when it comes to public records requests. And she and I have also established a relationship with the awareness that some of this record release could be something that happens through like a data portal. The fact that we don't have a centralized mechanism to deal with public records requests is really, again, something that kind of surprised me coming from a place that did have a centralized mechanism to responding for that. The volume of exceptions is also very shocking. Texas has 3. So there's been some shift. I think in terms of cultural shifting, it really does come to communicating in good faith early and often. And with me being just one individual, a lot of it is coming down to meeting with folks who are having these issues and figuring out how we can mediate them kind of in situ, like within that location, and growing from there. But I think it takes a long time, and it will take a long time, and I think it will continue to be kind of an uphill battle. But yeah, I remain hopeful. So yeah. Yes.
So I'm out there on the Data Oregon database, and what I see is a lot of old stuff. And so I imagine that this is all voluntary, whether somebody puts in their data sets. But has anybody thought about going back to people who've already previously published and ask if they want to publish again? The reason for that is, excuse me, that a lot of people change positions, people who were interested in before, no longer interested, and unless somebody is asking them to update something that was put out in 2016 and say put in 2019 for comparison, they might need a prod in order to help them
Right.
think of the ability to do that and the value of doing that.
Yeah, and there, so that's partially kind of why the CDO position was created, was to look at the fact that we purchased and launched an open data portal in 2011, and then noticed that folks were not voluntarily using it, or that adoption was very ad hoc, or it maybe wasn't strategic, or whatever kind of the gamut of things are that when you leave something to be ungoverned happen. So the creation of the open data program within my position is really designed to help codify some of the standards for that. I actually have a series of like data quality scripts that will be used to kind of report against the data portal to let people know like how fresh data is. If you look at Maryland, for example, their data portal actually has like a data freshness report that lets you know what's been updated in the last like 30, 60, 90 days. And then as data sets get stale, they notify the custodians. But codifying this through an actual set of standards is designed to help mitigate some of this. I posted something in 2015 and then I found a new job, and now no one posts anything because they didn't know that I did it in the first place, kind of thing.
I think a database of just the things that are updated.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. I think we're close to time anyway, but if there's one last question. Otherwise, my email's right there. I don't have any business cards yet, but there I am. All right. Thanks.